take that thought of schizophrenia and superimpose it on what we're going to see starting in Q4 2014, not starting and finishing, we presume, in Q4 2014, the stress tests, where we'll have verdicts on presumably hundreds of banks, not only in the Eurozone but across the whole EBA area, so including the UK in all its leveraged glory. Why do you think they're happening politically, David? And then we can get on to what we think the outcome will be technically.
Yeah. So basically, there are really two reasons for that. The first is to avoid the mistake that has been done by Japan 20 years ago.
Yeah.
In Japan, 20 years ago, no AQR has been done, and what you can see on this graph on the left is that the production of credit in Japan has consistently decreased over the last 20 years. And Japanese banks have never been able to restore their return on equity, which have remained below double digits. So that's the first reason.
The so-called zombie banks.
Yeah. Now there's a second reason, which I will
it's
let
the nice picture on the right.
Because you told them to.
Do you know, Liam, do you know where this is?
Well, it's certainly
looks
not
very nice.
London. Basel?
No, it's actually the land of Carinthia, which is in Austria, and which is unfortunately providing guarantees to the worst bank in Europe, which is called Hypo Aldria, which is a bank which is almost bust, but with a full guarantee.
Are they drinking lots of glug or something? Why are they doing that?
Because it was a public law guarantee which was existing like decades ago, and they can't get rid of it. So this is just to say that Draghi and the ECB are going to be the new boss, of the banking system, and when someone takes takes charge of a new company which is a bit in trouble, the first thing he does usually is to scrap the goodwill for 30 billion euros and start with a clean sheet. And it's exactly what the ECB wants to do. They don't want to have a bankruptcy on their hands. They don't want to be responsible for a new problem in the Eurozone, but they want everything to be cleaned up before before they are responsible for the banking system. And so they want to clean up banks like Hypo Aldria and many others in the Eurozone, because there are still many, I would say, zombie banks also in Europe.
And do you think the ECB will genuinely have the political clout to bust up historic relationships that are mutually beneficial for the commercial parties involved, but not necessarily beneficial for the host country in terms of the taxpayers? I mean, clearly the ECB is like all central banks, a very political organisation. The various jurisdictions which make up the governing body means there can be all kinds of scope for cross-border, under-the-table deals. How confident are you that there's going to be a genuine flushing out across the European banking sector of all the bad stuff on balance sheets that really does need to be flushed out if we're going to get this great economy, this great European economy of ours really motoring again?
So the first thing we can say is that we must admit that there is much more common sense in the ECB than it was in the past, since Draghi is there.
Yeah.
Very clearly, when you look at what has been done, either the LTRO or even the change in the management of the Cyprus crisis. If you remember, the Cyprus crisis went into two episodes. First episode where the European Union was stepping on the banking union project and on the idea of giving a guaranteed deposit to everyone, and all of a sudden it changed completely, and we see here the intervention of the ECB with much more common sense to maintain the guaranteed deposit scheme that was at stake in the banking union. So clearly it's a very I would say political and very difficult question, because you will always find, of course, influences and cost of the bailout for taxpayers. But what we are sure of is two things. First, there is much more common sense. Second, we didn't talk about it, but there is now a bail-in system, or to be more specific, a resolution system which is now organized in Europe, which wasn't the case before, and which will bring much more clarity.
Yeah, I think 5 years ago, I would have said no, but clearly politicians and taxpayers are more and more ready to take a harsh view on banks. I mean, the entire view has changed. You know, what happened in the Netherlands with SNS, for example, is a very good example. But the key here will be Germany, clearly. Because in Germany, you have lots of zombie banks, and you have very strong relationships between these banks and not the Bund, not the federal government, but the local governments. Yeah. So the key is going to be there. And my gut feeling is that because Germany has tried to impose many such situations on others, it would be difficult for them, to say, okay, don't look at my banks, it's my business. It's going to be a very, very delicate position for them. So I think they are going to be willing to do what it takes.
Even though they've tried to do that.
I do want to talk more about the stress test, and I bet my bottom dollar will come up in the question and answer as well. But just on Cyprus, we've talked about Cyprus before, David. I was personally really shocked when we had the so-called depositor bail-in in Cyprus, because I think that a real Rubicon was crossed there. Deposits aren't investments. A bond is an investment, an equity is an investment. You can get a return, either fixed income or variable, but you might lose your money. And yet to impose a bail-in on depositors, I think sent shivers of fear across the Eurozone. And yes, you're right, the ECB did step in and impose some kind of common sense by imposing a floor, a ceiling, below which depositors would be protected up to, I think it's 80,000 euros or something.
100.
But 100 in the end, negotiated right up until the last minute. But in the end, you still had a situation where deposits weren't sacred, and surely, despite the ECB's attempts to make the situation less severe, that's going to come back to bite us as we move towards some kind of banking union, no?
The key point is what rule you define and whether you stick or not to these rules. What was very shocking, I mean, for me, in the first episode of the Cyprus crisis, is that just before the Cyprus crisis, the EU had marketed widely the idea of the banking union with a cornerstone, which was the guarantee on deposit up to 100,000 euro. Okay. So it was something which was meant to secure the whole banking system, deposits, etc., in a uniform way around Europe. And all of a sudden, they decide to step on that.
Sure.
And to say, forget about it, we're going to bail in depositors, even if they are under 100,000 euros. So this for me, was completely crazy. However, we must keep in mind that when a bank goes bust, if there's not enough money to save deposits over 100,000, the bank will go bust, and people will lose deposits which are above 100,000, because the rule is that you can cover up to 100,000. So if you stick to the rule, people will understand.
But surely the big conclusion from that episode wasn't that the emergency rule held. The big deal of that event was that it had to be invoked anyway, that the depositor bail-in happened anyway. That's quite shocking.
I mean, it was very
shocking.
People
who work outside financial services.
It was very shocking, and we published a note just the day after, which was quite, I would say, punchy, and probably similar to what you described with your with your column and Mr. Osborne.
I like him really.
But when you are dealing with such situations and troubled bank, you have to be very cynical. And you have to really look at the specifics of the situation. What David was saying is that basically when the politicians need money, they take it where there is some, you know. And in Cyprus, there was no senior debt on the market, there was no subordinated debt on the market, and equity was very, very limited. On top of that, you had the very specific situation of the deposit market in Cyprus. You were saying a deposit is not an investment. That's true, that's because you live in the UK. But in Cyprus, half of the market was term deposits with maturity above 2 years and sometimes even up to 5 years, and yields which were around 5%. You know, you're not investing. You're not investing in a deposit with a 5% returns when the when the Bund rate is at 2 or even less, without taking a risk. And if you add to that the fact that, of course, there was this whole story about the oligarchs, laundering money through deposits in Cyprus, the picture was a bit messy. And
yeah, I mean that was good PR, I guess, to try and get West European voters on board.
Exactly.
But, when you've got Cypriot charities, Cypriot universities, Cypriot businesses and they're working, their working capital is just taken.
Yeah, that was the worst of it. It was really regular corporates, businesses with 1 million at the bank.
Soon after Cyprus, it wasn't, again, widely noticed. I'm amazed it wasn't a front page story in the FT. Soon after Cyprus, you had the IMF brought out its World Economic Outlook.
The Wales tax?
And there was a little box, I think it was on page 53 or something, and it had some kind of intellectual justification for, I think they called it a capital levy, whereas the notion that we may just decide to recommend to otherwise advanced industrial countries that there's a levy on the wealth of citizens of between, I think, 1% and 5%.
Yeah, but this is going to end at the European Court of Human Rights, so you're probably happy to know that there are some litigations going on, and I think they are going to win, actually.